We have a special privilege today. It's my honor to welcome and introduce the Honorable John Huntsman, Governor of the state of Utah. We're delighted that he's able to spend a few moments with us out of his busy schedule. Governor Huntsman, just walked up a long flight of stairs. Is also chairman of the Western Governors Association, and wearing both of those hats, he's working very hard on economic development in Utah and in the Rocky Mountain West. He's also very interested in energy and energy policy. He was one of the signers of the T. Boone Pickens energy policy plan, and he's challenged many other governors to join him in that. I'm told that he said recently that the three most important things about energy are affordability, independence, and sustainability. Sounds a whole lot like what our energy policy folks have been saying about energy. So I think we will all enjoy what he has to say today. And would you please help me welcome Governor John Huntsman, Utah.
Yeah, thanks for the kind intro. You can take a little rest now. Come up those stairs. That was tough duty. Well, welcome to what I think is the greatest state in America. Now, I say that based on some ability to compare and contrast, because I grew up in Los Angeles and lived in Maryland and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. 3 times and overseas 3 times. And this is an amazing place, and I saw, in your brochure, you were sort of describing the state, and then you got into the 3rd paragraph, and you described the liquor laws, and trying to explain in terms that all would understand sort of the quirky nature. Well, I want you to know that we've got the legislative session ongoing on Capitol Hill for 45 days. So if you want to know where you can derive some wind energy from, Capitol Hill's the perfect place right now. No legislators in the audience, I hope. And this legislative session, we're actually taking this, antiquated, anachronistic policy of club membership, where you've got to go in and you got to become a member of a club just to get in the joint, and we're dropping that. So we will basically, begin to mainstream the state as it relates to liquor laws. And I say that as the grandson and the great-grandson of a saloon keeper down in the middle part of the state, a town called Fillmore, which was the territorial capital for a good part of the West for 2 years before we became a state. And they opened up the Huntsman Hotel and then the adjoining saloon. And they were educators and saloon keepers. I don't know why those necessarily go hand in hand, but the teachers groups here tell me that there should be no connection whatsoever. And the saloon burned down under very mysterious circumstances in 1938. So I'm trying to carry on that legacy of moving things forward. Welcome to the state, and let me just tell you, we're experiencing some very unpredictable economic times. And I don't know how to put it in proper perspective for you, because I'm just coming off of a weekend with fellow governors, at least those who aren't currently in prison. So there were a good many of them there, and we got an economic forecast from Bernanke, who's the head of the Federal Reserve, from Geithner, who's the Secretary of the Treasury, from the President himself, from a few others, and some notable private economists, and they all kind of go in different directions, which is a little disconcerting when you're trying to get a sense of direction for your state, and any CEO would be doing the same thing for their business. And it kind of dawned on me, after hearing all of these explanations, if economists were to trade jobs with weather forecasters, would anyone ever know the difference? And they're all very good and they know their science, but it seems that next year is likely to be the year of stabilization, where we might even see some positive growth by the end of the year. But through it all and the way in which we've been impacted here in our own state, I'm reminded of a famous flight that took place in June of 1982. And you as mechanically and quantitatively inclined people would appreciate this. It was a British air flight under the command of Captain Moody that left London en route for a place called Sydney, Australia, back in June of '82. And if you're familiar with your aviation history, you'll connect with what I'm about to tell you. And so it left London en route to Sydney. It stopped in Singapore, where I used to live, in the heart of Southeast Asia, and refueled and then got on its way on its last leg to Sydney. And as it was flying over this country of Indonesia, where I've spent a lot of time, this vast archipelago of 13,000 different islands, it encountered some sulfuric ash that had been sort of plumed into the air by way of volcanic explosion. Mount Galanggang, which is in West Java. And as the Boeing 747 hit the sulfuric ash, a remarkable thing happened. Not one, not two, not three, but all four of those mammoth engines died. And this 747 became, the largest glider in the history of humankind all of a sudden as it started losing altitude over West Java. And noteworthy is the fact that Captain Moody got on the PA system, and in what must have been the record for understatement, said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a small problem. We have just lost all four of our engines." And this is a direct quote. "We are doing our damnedest to try to get them restarted. We hope that this has not caused you any inconvenience." And so a remarkable thing happened. They fired up not one, not two, not three, but all four of the engines, and off it went back on a safe journey to Sydney, Australia. And I kind of feel the same way. We're kind of on this cruise, this flight together as a country, and we've lost our engines of growth. And we're kind of dropping in terms of altitude, trying to find the bottom, trying to get those engines of growth fired up. And we don't know when it's going to happen. We do know it's going to happen, and when it does happen, boys, there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand out there in terms of the ability to get back into the marketplace and begin to purchase. So the lesson for all of us, at least in this state, is keep innovation alive and well. So when you look at the budgets that are proposed and the recommendations within the recent budgets, what does it do to the thing called innovation and entrepreneurship? Because I can't tell you where this thing is going to end, but I can tell you the way we're going to get out of it ultimately is by entrepreneurs doing what they've done for decades in this country, and that is allowing us ultimately to grow out of the situation that we're in. And we're trying to keep all of our innovative engines going in this state, which I think is going to serve us very well longer term. Now, you all are driven kind of by the spirit of Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell. And if you look at these two guys, first of all, they were born about a month apart in 1847, one in February, one in March. And the uniqueness carries forward because they both were terrible students in school. In the case of Thomas Edison, he remained in school for 3 months. And his teacher was overheard as saying that he was an addled student, addled, A-D-D-L-E-E-D, which means muddled. They thought he had a muddled mind. Alexander Graham Bell had written on his school record that his absenteeism was high, along with very, very poor grades. And what did they go on to do? They went on to change the world. Innovators, inventors, business people, in the case of Edison, holder of 1,093 patents, invented the phonograph and, of course, the light bulb. But it all came out of necessity. And they all created their inventions because there was something around them in their lives at that particular time in American history that prompted them to do what they did. In the case of Alexander Graham Bell, his father and his brother had been associated with elocution and speech. And he himself had a mother and a wife who were deaf. So he spent a good part of his career trying to come up with these novel hearing devices, which ultimately, in his case, became the telephone in 1876. He so hated the invention that he refused to have one in his own office because he said it was too disruptive to his thinking about science. You know, if only my kids could come in contact with him today. How many devices do they carry in their pockets? So let's just, think for a moment about the spirit of innovation, because we have to be poised as a state and as a country. We have to capture that zeitgeist, I guess they say, where all of a sudden there's a national will to get something done and to move forward. And I can tell you, having just been reelected, and I'm kind of an accidental politician. I never thought I was going to run. I used to make fun of people who would actually run for political office. Then I did it myself, and it's been a very, very interesting journey. But I ran for re-election this last year. And I went out 4 years ago when I ran initially, 5 years ago, and I did a top 10 list of the issues that people felt strongly about, sort of unscientifically, thousands and thousands of conversations. And then I printed a book, kind of a manual, a 30 or 40-page manual, and said, if you want to vote for me, this is what I'm going to do. If you don't like what I'm going to do, don't vote for me. It's pretty simple. And so we got elected 5 years ago. And I tried to do the same thing this last year for re-election. And it was interesting because we went out to survey a lot of the citizens of this state and a lot of the small and medium-sized businesses. Because if your economy does well, everything else does well. If you want to be a good education governor, you got to be a good economic development governor and make sure that the private sector is viable. And the issues that rose to the top of the list this time, compared to nowhere on the list 4 years ago, I thought was very telling. Healthcare reform. It was nowhere to be found 5 years ago. And now we've come to the point, in our state anyway, where only 40% of our companies are offering healthcare. And they're saying, I had a conversation with a dairy farmer at a burger joint after a speech I gave at a university a couple of years ago. Never thought in 1,000 years I'd be sitting down with a dairy farmer who'd want to talk about healthcare. And I thought, when it got to that level, this is a hugely consequential issue. And he said, I've got 9 employees. I can't afford to cover insurance for them anymore. And I said, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to let them ride. And I thought, well, that's the problem, in healthcare. We've got a mandate in the system, and it's called the emergency room. And when anybody gets sick, whether they're insured or not, they go to the emergency room, and somebody's got to pay for it somewhere along the line. So we started getting busy on healthcare reform, but it was interesting that would rise to the top of the list. The second one was energy, and that was nowhere to be found 5 years ago. Nobody cared. No, gas prices were cheap, and you pretty much got the power delivered to your home, so on and so forth, and no more. With high energy prices that we all experienced this last summer, I think it was July 27th of this last summer, $1.47 or $147 a barrel is what prices hit. I think people hit a boiling point, and it changed our country. And I think we're still of a mind that we want to basically get this whole area right in terms of energy. And I thought back to Winston Churchill, who created a revolution, whether we know it or not, that kind of got us in the predicament we're in with oil. He used to hold this job in the United Kingdom called, it was the Lord of the Admiralty, which is analogous to Secretary of the Navy here in the United States. He did an interesting thing in about 1915, 1916, just before the onset of World War I. He converted the Navy fleet, based on a recommendation that one of his commanders gave to him, from coal, which they had in huge abundance in the UK, to oil, which they didn't have. And they knew that they'd have to kind of create alliances with countries kind of far-flung, but in their basic continent in order to fuel their national security needs. Everybody thought he was nuts when he did it, Churchill. But he made the conversion for performance reasons. Our ships will be faster, our ships will refuel easier, and we're not going to have these smoke plumes that give our position away when we burn coal. And so he made the conversion to oil, which, among other things, led the UK into the Middle East. From an economic and a national security standpoint, they developed a relationship with southern Mesopotamia, which, of course, today is Iraq. And in they went right at the end of World War I and occupied the country starting in about 1921, right after the Treaty of Versailles, and stayed there until 1932, the Brits did, all in the name of pumping oil back to the UK so they could fuel the naval fleet. And an interesting thing happened in southern Mesopotamia, which is Iraq. They were run out of the country by 1932. They went in 1920 with the best of intentions, trying to change the behavior, trying to make it a country based on democratic principles. And they lasted until 32 and left. And I think there was an election right about that time in England where the prime minister lost his job over their foray into southern Mesopotamia, into Iraq. So we look back on Winston Churchill's decision to convert the naval fleet from coal to oil, and the way in which the UK ventured around the globe to ensure that there was a flow of oil to keep the fleet going for national security purposes into World War I and then World War II, and it changed the world. And you then look at what we have tried to do ever since. And I can cite chapter and verse just as you can about the attempts by subsequent American administrations to get us weaned from oil. Nixon stood up in '73 when oil was about anywhere between $3 to $11 a barrel during his presidency, and he said, we're going to be energy independent. You know, the end of my second term. Well, something happened by the end of his second term, and he wasn't quite able to deliver on that one. In '76, you know, Carter had an energy plan. We're going to be solar by 2000, and it didn't happen. Today, solar is 0.1% of our production, but a lot of high hopes. In '92, Clinton developed a strategy for the efficient car. It wasn't to be. And in 2000, Bush allocated $1.2 billion to the development of the hydrogen fuel car. Now, when I say $1.2 billion, people say that's a lot of dough. But that's one B-2 bomber in our inventory, one B-2 bomber. It really didn't go anywhere. So here we sit, and as we sat around this round table with governors over the weekend, somebody put up on the chart, well, look how far we've come in the area of computation. Look how far we've come since the 40s in aerospace. Look how far we've come in biomedical research. And then look where we stand in terms of electricity distribution, which is basically stuck in the 20s. How are we going to move off the dime? How are we going to change this dynamic? And I ventured a thought. I don't know if it resonated at all, but I said, if you look at what we've done in computation, if you look at what we've done in aerospace and in biomedicine, there was a significant event that drove all of that. It was called the National Security Act of 1947. Remember that? It created the CIA, the United States Air Force, and the United States Department of Defense, which up to that point had been the War Department, and the Pentagon was built sometime thereafter. And within the Department of Defense, it created a group called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Program. And I said, we had an overriding national security need in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s to get all that stuff done. It was called the Cold War. And so, of course, computation took off. It was in the name of the Cold War. And of course, aerospace advancements went well beyond what anybody had predicted because it was the Cold War. And the same thing with biomedical research. They all had some logical tie-in to our national security posture at the time. Electricity, no. You know, you do it the same old way. And so my question to you, as it was to so many at our conference over the weekend, was what is the overarching national need today to get something done? Do we have an organizing principle? We don't have the Cold War. That got everybody focused and motivated, singularly on the one enemy that we had and where we needed to be as a country. We don't have that today. We're all kind of split and diffuse in different directions. So what is the organizing principle that's going to cause everybody to come together and say, we need to get this done. We need to become energy independent, we need to have affordable energy, and we need a smart and reliable grid system that allows all of this to become a reality. I say that rhetorically because I don't know the answer. All I can tell you is, based on where I sit as an elected official, the citizens are telling us this must be done, and we want it done. The mailer that I sent out surveying the companies and citizens told me this last year, this is a priority for us. We want to see it done. So we're doing some simple things as a state. And all I know is that you got to set a goal, and then you got to move toward executing the goal. Our goal, plain and simply, is to become the premier destination for renewable energies in the United States. Yeah, our base load has been very reliably coal from the very beginning, but the world's a changing place. And it always will be coal in terms of a very large percentage of what we rely upon. But on the upper end, you got to do something a little different. We're going to make it happen here. We've got a goal, and the thought that Utah would ever have come up with a renewable portfolio standard would have caused people to run for cover a few years ago. Today we have one, and it's 20% of our portfolio by 2025. It's done. Second, all I know is you've got to have land, you got to have incentives, and you got to have a vision. And if you can pull it all together, chances are investors are going to follow those opportunities. And so I've sat down with the wind folks, I've sat down with the solar people, I've sat down with the geothermal folks, and I said, what do you need? We'll make it happen here, and we'll be faster than any other state in America in delivering it. So out of this legislative session that's going to end in a week and a half, I hope and I think, and I'm pretty confident that we're going to have legislation that speaks to incentives. Whether it's a tax holiday or a property tax incentive, also financing capabilities to tie into the grid, because you need branches on the trees that get out to these individual projects. Nobody wants to talk about, nobody wants to get it done, nobody wants to finance it, so we're going to do it. We're going to figure out a way through our bonding capacity, creating a public-private partnership like we've done with Hill Air Force Base up the way, and we're going to create that grid system that everyone says they need. And we've got the land in the southwestern part of our state that is perfectly situated. It has wind, it has geothermal, it has sun. You know, just like it were, and it is part of the Sun Belt in America. So we're moving forward to the best of our ability, and I can tell you it's happening because the people are insisting that it get done. And all I would ask of you is that you stay on top of some of these projects, that you try to become familiar with what we are trying to do. You try to give us an assist. I know you represent different organizations and different companies around the country. And the bottom line for us is we're moving very, very quickly in this direction. And it's going to happen because the people are behind it, and they're pushing the elected officials to make it happen. And so I think over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be a very, very interesting place as it relates to energy affordability, energy independence, and finally coming to grips with this thing called emissions, which nobody talked about in this state. Emissions? Who cares? Well, guess what's happening today? We've got this confined geographic area, which you're sitting in right now, the Salt Lake metropolitan area, which is about 2 million people from top to bottom. And it's surrounded by this natural formation called mountains, and the air gets trapped in the valley. Now, all of a sudden, in the last few years, Utah has some of the worst air quality of any state in America. There are certain days of the year where we are number one in terms of bad air, not only here, but up in the northern part of our state, Logan. And so our citizens are saying, I don't get this one. You know, everybody thought we're kind of a rural state, you're just a flyover part of the country. How could it be that you have bad air quality? Well, we have a population density that is no different than Los Angeles County, where I grew up, or any other big metropolitan area. And it is the concern on air quality when it becomes deleterious for both young and old that the citizens stand up and say, we want action, we want movement, we want something done. Will you please help us on this front? So it's becoming an issue, and we're driving it forward, and something's going to get done. But all I can say is, first of all, thank you for having your conference here in our state. We are most grateful in today's economic environment. Whenever we can get people to hold their conferences in our state, we are very, very grateful. So to your organizers, thank you for being here, and we hope that you enjoy your time. Second, I hope you can put on your seatbelt and hang on for the ride, because we're in for some very, very interesting years ahead that I think finally are going to speak intelligently and affirmatively to energy policy in finally getting something done and getting us to where we need to be if we truly are going to consider the 21st century the greatest of all centuries for the United States of America. Thank you very much for being here.